thank you for being here. People who are facilitators, you're going to be with a small breakout group of about 10 people. We had 20 or 30 new registrants yesterday afternoon. So we're probably in the 100, 110 range total on the day so far registered. It's possible that other people could come in if they have the link from other emails or sent by other people. But we've got 11 facilitators so far, and if at some point we see that our breakout groups are larger than expected, you may hear me or Amy Cornell ask you to facilitate. Facilitate, as those of you who got the email saw, involves asking the prompt question or reminding people what the prompt question is for each breakout group, keeping time, and letting quiet people get heard. Just good ground rule stuff. Everybody who is a facilitator is okay with that so far? Okay, thank you all. Our Zoom engineer for today is the great and powerful Amy Cornell.
You were ready to say crazy, so go ahead and say.
No, I was thinking of Wizard of Oz. Amy will be running the Zoom for this in a role we've seen Steve Welch do at other meetings. Amy will be keeping time for the day, opening and closing the breakout groups, tracking the chat, and channeling questions during our Q&A session at the end. Does that sound right, Amy? Everybody's okay with that? Our speaker today, for those of you who are here early, we're going to get an introduction section, is the Reverend Dr. Wally Fletcher. Wally, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Okay. Does anybody among the facilitators or team members have a question that they need addressed before we begin the day? Everybody who's got a role kind of has a grip on it. We know that this is an act of improvisation as well as planning, and we'll do the best you can. We'll all do the best we can. Okay. Amy, are all the doors open? I see 54 participants as we turn 9:30. So people are just clicking in now?
Yeah, there is no waiting room, so as soon as someone comes on, they're going to come directly into the meeting.
Okay. A couple of things that I'm going to say more about this, but we do have a Spanish language translation as part of today's event. And I want to thank Ramon Guerra and Sebastian Vasquez, I think, and Juan for participating in that. That is something that as a diocese community, we are growing into. And today is a place, given the importance of the topic and the importance of community, that we are doing a pilot program to see how that works. There will be a debriefing afterwards for lessons learned. And parts of it will probably work, parts of it probably won't work, but we're going to give it a try today and see what we can learn and build it into how we do this at future diocese events. Okay. I can't see everybody. And I see a couple of people are signed in as me. Okay. Hi, Bruce. Signed in as me. Hi, Mark Van Zant and Bill Noble. It looks like I gave out my personal link for my registration when I sent the email to the facilitators. I didn't know that there was a personal sign-on for that. Theoretically, you're able to change your name. Amy is able to change your name. If we run out of other things to do today, we'll fix that. Everybody okay with that? Okay. A word about recording. We will record the presentations by our speaker, Dr. Wally Fletcher. We will not record breakout sessions. We will not record Q&A. The idea is that the material presented by Wally will be available for future use by the diocese community, and that comments, questions by clergy participants will not be recorded or shared. Okay? Amy, we have a screen. This looks like the Spanish language login. Is this right?
Yes, Steve asked me to put this up for a minute or so at the beginning, just in case there's anyone who isn't sure about how to set up for the translation. So that's the information if you want to go ahead and walk through that and set it up for the translation. So I'll leave that up for another 30 seconds or so.
Okay. Ramon, Sebastian, and Juan, you see this?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I speak neither Spanish nor Zoom fluently, and I apologize. I am ashamed of having only one language, but you have what you need with this because my ability to help you is limited by my limits and their personal limits, and I'm quite aware of them today. You guys have everybody has what they need on this?
It's good.
Okay.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Bishop Stokes. Are you, I don't see you on screen, but you're in the mix somewhere, Bishop?
I am here. Thank you so much. Yep.
Bishop, will you give an opening greeting and open
Sure.
us in prayer this morning, please?
Yeah, I'd be honored to do that. First of all, welcome and good morning to all. I'm so glad that you're here. I think that this is a really important piece for us today, and I'm really grateful. I'm grateful to Bob Fitzpatrick and the Clergy Wellness team that put it together. They've worked hard to create this event. I want to give a special nod and shout out to Amy Cornell because, as you all know, we had planned a Clergy Wellness Day together and live before the coronavirus pandemic changed all our lives. And so when that began, Clergy Wellness, along with a lot of other things, sort of fell along the wayside. And Amy emailed me and said, I think we should have something. Can we go ahead? And I said, you're right. So I had just had
That's
a conversation.
rare.
No,
by the
you're
way.
often. We're gifted with you and a lot of others who are right a lot of the time, and it's great. And it is part of why we're a community of clergy, and that there's a collegiality built into that for which I'm deeply thankful. And right at that same time, I was in conversation with Wally Fletcher on some other matter, and it just became clear in the midst of all of that he had particular gifts that would be meaningful for us as a clergy community today, and he was amenable to doing that, and so I'm deeply thankful to him. Hi, Wally, I'm on my screen so I can see you. Good morning. It's great that you're here, and I'm deeply grateful for your willingness to work with us this morning. I'm thankful to all of you, the clergy, because you have been just adapting and moving and taking on a lot of stuff in the midst of this that is absolutely challenging, contrary to our being, our ontology as clergy, and in the midst of the grief that we manage as clergy all the time is the grief that comes with this, not only with people directly impacted by coronavirus, but all the stuff that's part and parcel of it, and the stuff going on in our own lives. And so this is a day for us to relax in one another and to unpack some of that and take a look at it and put it in its proper place, and hopefully work on ourselves and some healing and wholeness that will allow us to continue to be vehicles and vessels of God's grace. So let's go ahead and get started. I don't want to dominate this at all. And I'm going to start with prayer. I do want us to remember that it's hard to believe this is the second anniversary of the death of George Counsel. And so I hope everyone saw the letter the note from Ruth that we sent out. I was grateful to receive that. So we hold George in our hearts and memories today, and also pray for Ruth and for their family. I'm going to say two prayers, one more traditional, and then I found a really lovely a book of prayers that I'm going to draw from. It is called Ash and Starlight, Prayers for Chaos and Grace in Daily Living. A really lovely prayer. So I'll start with the more traditional prayer. Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, from whom comes every good and perfect gift, send down upon all of us as a clergy community and upon the congregations committed to our charge the healthful spirit of your grace, and that we may truly please you. Pour upon us the continual dew of your blessing, and especially on this day, as we gather together, work on our healing and wholeness for your name's sake and for the sake of your people. Grant this, O Lord, for the honor of our advocate and mediator, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
and then from ash and starlight. In this day, O God, may we be alert. May we be kind. May we be compassionate. May we be authentic. May we be generous. May we be forgiving. May we be honest. May we be brave. May we be forgiving again. May we be open. May we live from our intentions, not simply from our habits. May we hold closely in prayer the people you bring to our hearts and minds right now and throughout this day. May we focus. May we trust. And above all, may we be yours. In Christ's name we ask it. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. For those who are just coming in, I'm Bob Fitzpatrick. Amy Cornell is our Zoom engineer today, keeping time, administering breakout groups, monitoring the chat. We will be recording the presentation of our speaker, Dr. Wally Fletcher. We will not be recording breakout groups or question and answer, so people can be in community and confidentiality and say and hear what they need for themselves in community and from the Spirit. I want to thank the team who put this together and all the facilitators. And Bishop Stokes, thank you for turning over one of your clergy town hall time slots for this, for suggesting this, and for this as an extension of your pastoral care to us as the clergy of the diocese, and for bringing in outside resources, including our speaker, Wally Fletcher, today. Wally Fletcher is an ordained minister, a psychoanalyst, speaker, and author with an emphasis on stressors in clergy life and responding to stress as clergy. And I think the best thing to do is just say good morning, Wally, and you're on.
Thank you, and thanks so much for this invitation. As we all know from our daily lives, the special varieties of stresses that clergy deal with in their day-to-day work under normal times test our adaptive capacities along with those of our congregations. But in this short and long-term impact of COVID-19, these normal stresses are intensified and multiplied in ways that are at a once-in-a-generation generational level. Today I want to, some of this will be familiar to you, but it's always helpful to review. I want to spend some time, the first presentation, talking about 5 different types of stress that we experience and the importance of doing a reflective inventory that helps us know where our stress is coming from and how we're experiencing it and how to best strategize for addressing the different types of stress that we're facing. In the second part, I want to share with you several themes that I have collected from many conversations that I've had with clergy over the last several weeks in my work, with varieties of work with clergy, particularly from 3 ongoing clergy groups of folks that I listen to regularly. And then in the third part, we'll talk more about strategies for resilience and how we shift mindsets from a kind of bouncing back mindset to a bouncing forward mindset. I'll explain what that means in a little while. So one of the most challenging parts of dealing with stress is identifying its specific sources along with the specific emotions and reactions that come with it. Our task in doing this is made difficult by a number of things. One is our stress reactions are at first mostly automatic and unconscious. We can't always easily identify the specific sources of our stress. The same is true of the specific emotions and impulses we're having. We can't always be clear about what exactly we are feeling and what exactly we are feeling driven toward. Stress also often involves multiple sources and multiple emotional components that can be hard to sort out. that the what do you need question can be a hard one for us to answer. The complexities of stress and stress management in this extraordinary event shouldn't be underestimated. There are a lot of good sources of advice. I'm sure you're getting lots of helpful articles and resources, as I am, but it's also important to avoid simplistic approaches and overgeneralizing in ways that ignore the complexity of the kind of stresses that we're dealing with. Someone famously said, every complex problem has a simple solution, and it's wrong. So we also can't overemphasize the importance of reflective practices that help us understand the nature of stress, of our stress, and help us make more adaptive choices. So I've focused on at least 5 types of stress that we're all familiar with, three of which we're all pretty familiar, and 2 of which we may not have had as much exposure, at least in the literature, to. And I want to speak to all 5 of those, and especially highlight the importance of the latter 2, which you may not have read as much about. The first one, of course, is the most familiar. It's often called in our literature personal or primary stress. That's the kind of stress that we feel as individuals in situations of threat or trial or trauma that affect us or people directly, or people that we're very close to. All the stresses of normal life, and there are plenty of them, and of the human condition are intensified and multiplied by momentous events like what we're going through now. Individuals and relationships that are already strained are even more so now. And I hear, I'm sure as you do, lots of stories of folks whose whose normal family stresses have been complicated and intensified and multiplied by this event. The second kind of stress that we clergy are exposed to a good bit is often called secondary stress. It's the kind that comes from caring for others who are in need or experiencing stress. People in helping professions are susceptible to taking in other people's stress in helpful, empathic ways, but also in unhealthy ways that can become a part of the hazards of our calling. Clergy and first providers and other helping professionals can be vulnerable to vicarious stress at levels that are as intense as sometimes called secondary post-traumatic stress syndrome. And what is probably more familiar to a lot of us is just what some people frequently refer to as compassion fatigue. So secondary stress is a significant issue, particularly when you're listening to lots and lots of people who are hurting, who are having the same feelings that you're having. And you're doing what we often call, in my work, the emotional labor of trying to process and manage your own feelings and be aware of them enough that you can be available to other people, and at the same time not allow yourself to be overwhelmed by the affects of the folks that you were dealing with. Third level of stress that I know is familiar to you all is systemic stress, and that's the kind that comes from working with or within highly demanding, anxious, strained, and or unhealthy organizational or social cultural environments. As social beings, the workplaces, schools, churches, and larger social systems we are part of and rely upon can be sources of stress themselves, as well as sources of support and satisfaction. The stresses that impact us through our participation in these systems are also increasing in this event as the systemic health and resilience of organizations is being tested in unprecedented ways. The one example that's particularly important is that in this COVID context, the role of systemic economic and social inequities play a big role in how this virus impacts certain groups more than others. Also, ministers also regularly face more than ever systemic obstacles to doing the things we would like to be able to do for people that we're trying to serve, as well as for ourselves. The fourth type of stress is moral stress. That's the kind that results from dealing with situations that seriously test or threaten our core values and sense of integrity. That test the ways we feel about the kind of person we are and the kind of work that we do. For example, when people find themselves feeling in situations where they're caring for parishioners, find themselves feeling as though they're in no-win situations in terms of the kind of care that they want to provide, and the ways that they want to do what seems like the right thing but feel constrained for one reason or another. Dealing with the hard choices all of us are having to make these days, especially in situations of moral hazard like pastoral care and deciding about worship gatherings and those kinds of things. We often find ourselves choosing between what we believe is the right or best thing to do and what seems like the necessary and worst thing we can do. It's usually not helpful in managing that kind of stress when people try to reassure us that it's not our fault. Because as moral individuals and responsible individuals, we feel the weight of having to make decisions that are very difficult ones in situations like that, about how we allocate time, resources, care, and how we perform things that are a core part of our ministry and our identity. The fifth type of stress, the one that I think is most upfront for many of us in this context, is what I'm calling adaptive stress. Now, all stress is a test of our adaptive capacities. It all involves the questions of adaptivity. But the speed and relentlessness with which adaptive change demands confront us can become a source of stress in its own right. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Ronald Heifetz's work on adaptive work and adaptive leadership. Adaptive work and coping is needed when we find ourselves in new territory where time-honored and reliable solutions or ways of coping no longer work for us. Adaptive work involves new learning and deep changes in the ways people approach things and solve problems, along with changes in values, orientation, perspective taking, and mindset. Adaptive work is deep work, and it's more inside out than outside in the sense that the answers and solutions that we have to come up with involve internal work as much as they involve taking in answers and solutions from the outside. For all these reasons, adaptive work and adaptive change are stressful. And in that stress, we tend to go through different stages with it, as with other types of stress. In that, in the early and acute phases, sometimes our adrenaline can kick in, and we can find ourselves being able to respond and sustain adaptive work a little easier than we could sustain an adaptive mindset and lots of adaptive challenges coming at us over a longer period of time, and where our adaptive coping capacity can give way to exhaustion and sometimes even self-destructive behaviors. So overall, with respect to all of these, it's a few things are important to kind of underscore. One of them is that in each of these types of stress, we can experience acute or chronic forms of them. The chronic forms are more damaging over time because in our stress response, the one we're gifted with by God and is hardwired into our brain, is one that has the purpose of responding and reacting quickly, then settling down, and moving on. But when stress demands pile up and come at us too quickly over time, it can be more challenging. Different types of stress require different types of strategies. So it's important to get clarity as much as we can about what our stresses are and what's the best approach for coping under those for those particular types of stress. And of course, the complication to all that is that it's very rare that we're only experiencing one kind at a time, isn't it? It's usually the case that there are stressors at a number of these different layers that are operating and that we are dealing with at the same time, which again adds to the challenge of sorting them out and responding. So in terms of improving our adaptive coping with stress, one of the people that I found helpful to me is Robert Wicks. He's a pastoral psychologist who's done a lot of research and writing on stress, post-traumatic stress, secondary post-traumatic stress, and so on. And he emphasizes, as I've come to emphasize around this, the importance of disciplined, reflective practice. For example, he recommends to helping professions, one of his, and I'll give you a bibliography, I'll send that afterwards, so don't worry about this. But he's written a book called Overcoming Secondary Stress in Medical and Nursing Practice. And when I read it the first time, I thought, well, that sounds like ministry to me in many ways as well, to be relevant. Because in that area, nurses and first providers are used to the concept of doing stress debriefings. He picks up on that idea and advocates that ministers, therapists, other helping professions develop a kind of regular discipline. He even recommends daily of doing a daily stress debriefing on ourselves. And he has lots of ideas about how to do that. But for me, since I need a little bit of simplicity, I'm just going to kind of walk through the 5 steps that I think are a helpful part of this kind of reflection. The first one, of course, is just making space for it, which is not necessarily easy, especially when people are working at home and leading kindergarten, teaching, doing school at home, and a bunch of other things. Making space and quieting ourselves in ways that can be reflected. And then considering each of these 5 kinds of stress, recognizing that we probably are responding on a number of different levels at the same time. And first asking this kind of series of questions. What are you experiencing as most stressful in each of these areas? How are each of these stresses impacting you physically, emotionally, and spiritually today? What physical, emotional, and spiritual resources do you have for coping with these stresses? And what resources do you need more of? Based on these reflections, what are 1 or 2 actions or practices you might perform for improving your stress coping in this moment? And who might you consider a helpful partner and companion in this? So it moves from clarifying and identifying the stress that you are having and its impact to reviewing and inventorying, if you will, the resources that you have and that you need, to considering a couple of small steps because we can't change everything. Some things we can change more easily than others. And always remembering that we're relational creatures, and we do self-care best in a situation where we are accepting as we offer companionship and so on. Now, it might sound unrealistic and laborious to do this kind of work, but I'm pressing on that in the sense of considering the cost of not doing that kind of work and waiting until we suffer from all the symptoms that can come from becoming overwhelmed or disoriented in the midst of our work. One of the things that Robert Wicks says in that book that I love is he directs this to those of us who care for other people. He says, one of the most important things we do as ministers and ministering to others is we just sit with them and be present to them. And then he asks the challenging question in return, are we willing to just sit with ourselves with that same care and devotion? Are we willing to just sit with ourselves with that same level of care and devotion? That's the kind of reflective process and the kind of mindset that I advocate in terms of our being able to get to know ourselves, get comfortable and practice at taking inventory of ourselves, and becoming more strategic in the ways in which we respond to the different types of stress that we're undergoing at any time. So with that, I think we're ready for the first breakout. We're just about on time, I hope.
Yes, we're doing perfectly on time.
Good.
I just want to make everyone aware that this is the first time that we've tried to do breakouts with this size of a group. Hopefully it will go well. We had organized everything yesterday, and today that organizational list is not coming up in Zoom, so I've now just reset everybody. Hopefully you're all in good rooms with good people. If you come into the room and there is someone who has not been designated as facilitator, would someone please pick up the ball and facilitate? Basically, it's just monitoring and make sure everyone's getting an opportunity to speak. Bob,
Okay.
do you have anything before?
Very briefly, Amy will send out a 1-minute warning to call everybody back to this full group. So facilitators and group members, you'll all see that on your screen. It's a countdown. Take it seriously because it's not a soft end, it's a hard end. And it'll bring us back in the group. The other thing is that there is a pattern to this day. We didn't do printed agendas and all that kind of stuff, but there is a pattern to the day. 20 minutes presentation by Wally Fletcher, about 20 minutes of breakout, a 5-minute break, repeat. There are 3 cycles of that, 20, 20, and a 5-minute break. Amy, turn it back.
And the focal question for this breakout session, and I think and the facilitators have it, is what types of stress are you experiencing more of or a different form of during this present crisis, and how are you coping?
Spanish language people, you're going to need to reselect Spanish when we come back to the big group. Ramon, Sebastian, and Juan have instructions and guidance on how to do that. And if you guys can make that the last minute of your breakout group, I would be grateful. Everybody
All right,
good?
everyone, say a little prayer and let's give this a shot.